The story of humankind has been built on sacred lies. Have you ever wondered why the Bible describes chariots of fire, wheels within wheels, and a God who walks around and gets angry? Powerful interests try to keep you from connecting the dots, labeling everything as mere metaphors. But what if these descriptions were actually camouflage for technologies belonging to flesh and blood beings? Ancient records talk about genetic manipulations, extraterrestrial presences inside sacred temples, and artifacts locked away under heavy secrecy. While a few profit from this mystery, most are unaware of suppressed apocryphal books and references to hybrid gods. Imagine discovering that much of humanity's faith has been built on hiding a tangible alien presence. Documents removed from the canon, deliberate attempts to wipe out evidence, and forced dogmas show that none of this happened by chance. Here is the story, more unsettling than any fairy tale, that they do not want you to know.
Some people claim that human history rests on pillars of mystification, and this video raises a question many find disturbing. Could the gods and angels of the Bible, which appear in stories full of wonders and heavenly apparitions, actually be beings from other planets who visited Earth in remote times? Traditional theories would rather explain these narratives as spiritual allegories or symbolic constructs. But certain researchers argue that there is solid evidence of ancient extraterrestrial contact that was deliberately distorted, manipulated, and silenced by power structures that have controlled the official version of these accounts for centuries. Sacred texts describe angels descending in chariots of fire, bodily divinities with human needs, and creatures able to manipulate genetics and technology that far exceeded anything ancient populations could possibly understand. Virtually every culture worldwide has eerily similar tales. Entities coming from above, accompanied by fire, dazzling lights, and inexplicable rumblings. If you take a closer look, you might see how these descriptions could match visitors from other worlds who showed up in ways that ancient people interpreted as divine. Does that mean we absolutely need to reinterpret these accounts, or is it just speculation? Is it possible that so-called religious truth is actually an institutional arrangement meant to keep billions of people locked into a manipulated narrative? Over the centuries, religious and political authorities may have benefited from more spiritualized versions of these events, hiding the real implications of visitors from beyond Earth. This theory did not appear out of nowhere. Pioneer research like that of Francesca Stavrakopoulou, an expert in Hebrew Bible, shows that the God of the early Israelites was seen as a tangible being who occupied specific places, almost like a physical presence with boundaries. Later, due to historical shifts, that entity became increasingly abstract and omnipresent, with no bodily traits. Why such a drastic change? Another scholar, Betty Kovacs, looked into Gnostic traditions and apocryphal texts, which are often ignored by official circles. She found repeated patterns of contact with beings who provided advanced information about astronomy, technology, and the nature of existence, usually described in literal terms rather than mystical ones. Were these accounts purposefully left out of the canon because they went beyond what suited the construction of an institutionalized religion? The convergence of academic findings and the ancient astronaut theory suggests a centuries-long pattern of intentional concealment. Could there really be a behind-the-scenes effort to preserve religious and political power by stopping humanity from discovering that what people have been calling divine might, in fact, be visits by far more advanced intelligences? Asking this does not aim to discredit spirituality, but to invite viewers to wonder if messages and encounters once interpreted as supernatural might actually have a natural cause, or more precisely, an extraterrestrial one. Who would stand to gain by keeping this information under wraps? possibly institutions that have profited for generations from the idea that there is only one way to reach God, and that this path depends on a religious hierarchy. By maintaining the supposedly ethereal and unreachable God, they secure a monopoly over the ultimate meaning of life. If an alternative version were confirmed, revealing a cosmic origin for divine narratives, it could unravel the power of former secular and clerical empires. It also raises a big question. Is there a centuries-long conspiracy of silence carried out not just by modern governments, but also by the authorities who shaped the cultural foundation of the West? Understanding why ancient deities might have been extraterrestrials requires a closer look at how the Bible and other sacred texts were compiled. Mainstream religious beliefs gradually took shape through institutional readings that tended to downplay references to the gods' physical characteristics. However, in the older historical context, especially pre-exilic Israel, there was genuine belief in a divine entity with a body and a specific geographic location. Researchers like Stavrakopoulou present clear evidence that, in its early centuries, Yahweh was portrayed with a tangible, even localized, form. Passages like Yahweh came down in a cloud in Exodus chapter 34, verse 5, use a Hebrew verb that implies literal movement rather than a symbolic appearance. The very idea of the tabernacle and the temple as the dwelling place of the deity suggests a physical presence that occupied space and moved from one place to another. Seen outside the lens of later abstract theology, it becomes tough not to associate these descriptions with beings equipped with technology that ancient societies could not grasp. Civilizations from the ancient Near East, such as the Sumerians and Babylonians, recorded their gods descending from the skies in luminous craft, teaching mathematics, astronomy, and even environmental manipulation. Traditional archaeologists often dismiss this as myth. Yet when you consider, for instance, the precision of Sumerian astronomical calculations, it begs the question: how did they figure out these advanced concepts without external help? Is it not plausible to suppose that more advanced minds provided guidance to peoples who would have otherwise been unable to conceive of such discoveries? Historians agree that the first biblical canons were defined at gatherings like the Council of Nicaea under Emperor Constantine. The choice of official books went beyond preserving doctrinal purity. There was a need to unify faith in order to strengthen political power. Texts and gospels describing concrete interactions with celestial beings were discarded not only because of theological disagreements, but also because those accounts could undermine the idea of a church as the sole intermediary between the divine and humanity. Is it just a coincidence that writings like the Book of Enoch, filled with explicit references to the watchers who descended to earth, were excluded? It is hard not to suspect some level of intent here. Kovacs suggests that certain traditions, now deemed heretical, kept alive the memory of direct contact with superior intelligences. If these Gnostic documents had been accepted, the official religious histories might have embraced the idea that angels were visitors from other worlds, here with specific agendas for teaching and control. Christian orthodoxy and rabbinic Judaism lean toward increasingly spiritual interpretations, reinforcing a gap between what might have been physically real and what was later viewed as purely symbolic. On top of that, many theorize that to protect their interests, religious and political heads joined forces to dress up in mysticism, things that had once been described as acts of engineering and science. All of this provides fertile ground for the ancient astronauts hypothesis, which states that interplanetary travelers were around at the dawn of human civilizations, sharing knowledge and even manipulating our genetic development. After all, who would benefit from framing as divine stories that talk about interbreeding, manipulations, and secret teachings? The answer points to groups who, if confronted with the possibility that God was actually a set of more advanced beings, would lose a significant portion of their power over believers. This conspiratorial narrative is supported by a large amount of historical evidence showing that religious doctrines were always shaped by their political context, something many theology programs are reluctant to admit. When you read biblical accounts about God without the layers of later theology, you see a physical figure emerge. In Exodus chapter 33, verse 23, the being most people call the Creator refers to physical parts of his own body, like his face, back, and hand. Many traditional scholars say this is just metaphor, but the original Hebrew does not imply symbolism. It sounds more like a straightforward description of a tangible being. Stavrakopoulou stresses that the early version of Yahweh not only had a humanoid form, but also resided in specific places such as the tabernacle or the temple in Jerusalem. When older translations say, "The glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle," the original idea points to something beyond a purely spiritual rapture. Perhaps it was a device in operation, emitting bright light, deafening noises, and smoke. Each time fire and cloud are mentioned around the deity, it might well suggest advanced technology being witnessed by people with no scientific background. Some archaeologists have found artifacts that confirm worship of Yahweh in the form of figurines, which modern belief would consider heretical. Objects representing Yahweh and Asherah, a fertility deity, have been unearthed, hinting at early polytheism, or at least the understanding that there was a masculine deity occupying a certain place with bodily features. If that deity was ultimately an extraterrestrial being, it makes sense that the earliest worshippers would try to carve what they saw or imagined. Centuries later, religious authorities worked hard to suppress these images, insisting it was forbidden to depict the sacred. Another important clue comes from linguistics. Words like malach, which we translate as angel, originally mean messenger, without the supernatural overtones of later theology. And Elohim, usually taken to mean God, is plural and can also be understood as the mighty ones or the authorities. It is interesting to note that these terms might fit a scenario involving different delegations of extraterrestrials, each with a specific function, more than they fit a purely monotheistic viewpoint. In apocryphal or Gnostic texts, there are accounts of heavenly masters who showed up physically to initiates. Kovacs says these beings provided secrets about the universe, which clashed with the official worldview that emphasized rituals and priestly intermediaries. If a group of Israelites and other early peoples really had first-hand contact with visitors from the heavens, then the idea of a vast historical re-engineering to spiritualize these appearances becomes more plausible. Some argue that if the divine were confirmed to be extraterrestrial in nature, religious institutions would be severely weakened. Most religions are built on the belief in an omnipotent, invisible power that humans cannot fully comprehend. However, if that power turned out to be just, extremely advanced technology, still beyond our abilities, but not necessarily eternal or all-present, then institutional dependence could collapse. This might explain why, over the centuries, political and religious leaders joined forces to hush up any literal interpretations of biblical texts that step outside a purely mystical framework. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 presents a puzzling statement. "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." That plural is often explained away as a majestic plural, but anyone examining the original text sees something else going on. If there were a team of creators, who were they? Why the direct reference to our likeness? From a strictly scientific angle, it might imply a biological intervention in which these Elohim manipulated genetic material to create a species, humans, modeled after their own blueprint. Kovacs points out that Gnostic texts portray creation as a project that involved not just a supreme deity, but a group of archons who fashioned the physical body, elevating humanity to a hybrid status. The notion of a missing link in evolution could, from this perspective, be explained by sudden modifications in our genetic code. It is as if someone or something fast-tracked our leap from more primitive hominids to Homo sapiens, endowing us with far more advanced intelligence, consciousness, and dexterity than other primates. In that light, the Garden of Eden story takes on a whole new meaning. Instead of a metaphysical paradise, it could have been a lab where newly modified specimens were kept under observation. The forbidden fruit might have been knowledge that humans were not yet supposed to access. The sudden shift in status after this transgression, such as the moment Adam and Eve realized they were naked, could represent the dawn of self-awareness connected to some genetic or cognitive unlock. Another interesting point is the sharp decrease in human lifespan after the flood. Before that event, figures like Methuselah were said to live for centuries, but later generations are capped at around 120 years. In Genesis chapter 6 verse 3 it says, "Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. This might indicate a deliberate alteration to reduce human longevity to a predefined limit. If interplanetary visitors or creators were able to manipulate our biology, they could have adjusted that parameter whenever it suited them. Independent archaeological studies highlight findings that do not fit neatly into the standard evolutionary timeline, like skulls with anomalous shapes, extremely old skeletons, or cave art depicting people wearing strange gear. Mainstream science usually writes off these discoveries as inconclusive, but those who support the theory of genetic intervention say there is an active effort to bury any clue that backs this explosive possibility. Who would want to keep all of this under wraps? Possibly groups aware of how massive the social and political fallout would be if it were officially announced that we are a genetically guided project by superior intelligences. Religious and philosophical leaders would see their authority damaged. So it is easier to label all of it as heresy or pseudoscience to keep the status quo intact. Genesis chapter 6 verse 2 offers a chilling statement. The sons of God saw that the daughters of man were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves. The text says that the Nephilim, famous giants of old, were born from this union. For centuries, official interpretation has tried to soften this account by saying the sons of God were simply the godly offspring of Seth. But the original Hebrew implies beings different from ordinary humanity. The Book of Enoch, widely circulated during the Second Temple period, describes the Watchers, heavenly beings who descended on Mount Hermon, married human women, and fathered hybrid offspring. They taught metalworking, alchemy, warfare, and other skills that, according to the story, further corrupted Earth. Could these angels have actually been cosmic visitors breaking some rule against interference? Kovacs notes that references to forbidden knowledge given to humanity echo the tales of Prometheus in Greek mythology and other cultures that speak of gods bringing fire, scientific insight, to mankind. According to this narrative, the flood was the chosen punishment, not just for moral sins, but to purge the hybrid lineages that threatened the original human project. Noah, in this view, was perfect in his generations, possibly meaning that his genetic code was free of Nephilim contamination. Flood legends appear in almost every civilization, pointing to either a global event or at least a collective memory of massive destruction. If this was planned by superior intelligences, the goal might have been to hit the reset button on Earth, removing aberrations and saving only part of humanity. References to giants turn up again in stories like Goliath, the Philistine warrior. There are parallel accounts, allegedly suppressed by official institutions, about giant skeletons found at various archaeological sites worldwide. Organizations like the Smithsonian have been accused of collecting and hiding these remains, dismissing them as hoaxes or misinterpretations. Is it all just baseless conspiracy talk, or is there a coordinated global effort to keep such discoveries hidden? The one who controls the story decides what society can or cannot accept as truth. Over the centuries, religious leaders and intellectual elites appear to have reframed the flood as a divine punishment for moral failures instead of a purge of genetic hybrids. This version makes the event more spiritual and keeps the official interpretation in the hands of churches, blocking any room for an extraterrestrial angle. It is yet another piece of a puzzle suggesting the historical manipulation of records that could reveal a truth that is inconvenient for those in power. The Ark of the Covenant remains one of the biggest enigmas in the biblical narrative. Described with meticulous detail, including exact dimensions, materials, ornaments, and instructions for transportation, it seems unlikely to be just a symbolic object. It was built from acacia wood and covered in pure gold on the inside and outside, with golden cherubim placed on the lid facing each other. In Exodus, chapter 25, there are extremely precise building instructions. Why all this care for a simple ritual item? Mishandling it could be lethal. Uzzah, who reached out to steady the ark, died on the spot according to 2 Samuel chapter 6 verses 6 to 7. Did it function like an electrical capacitor capable of lethal discharges? In episodes involving the Philistines, the Bible mentions tumors, plagues, and devastating effects tied to the ark, which we can now link to radiation or some unknown contamination. If it contained alien technology, it is understandable that ancient peoples would not grasp it, but would definitely fear its power. Stavrakopoulou notes that there were other dangerous ritual objects in the ancient Near East, but the Ark stands out for its unusual characteristics. Kovacs, meanwhile, sees the Ark as one of several extraterrestrial devices mentioned in various traditions, suggesting that it served both as a communication channel and an energy source. That would explain why only the high priest was allowed near it, under strict protocols. It could have been something like a shielded bunker to protect people from side effects that could be fatal for the unprepared. In battles, the Ark acted like a weapon. Leading the Israelite troops, it paved the way and struck fear into enemies, possibly releasing destructive waves or altering the environment in ways ancient science could not explain. The Siege of Jericho is a famous example, where simply marching around the city with the Ark led to the collapse of its walls. Many people dismiss that as legend. Others propose amplified sound vibrations. Or maybe it was an otherworldly technology capable of shaking solid structures when activated. Nobody is sure where the Ark finally ended up. Some traditions place it in Axum, Ethiopia, but there is no proof. Perhaps it was taken away under higher orders, disappearing from the biblical story. Losing track of such a powerful device might have been convenient for those who wished to control its use or hide its real nature. This could have been the first major cover-up of advanced technology in recorded history, setting a pattern for secrecy that continues whenever the topic involves extraterrestrial contact and artifacts beyond human understanding. The prophet Ezekiel, exiled in Babylon, describes one of the Old Testament's most jaw-dropping visions, a vehicle that looked like wheels within wheels, surrounded by fire, sparks, and thunderous noises. He also speaks of living creatures with multiple faces and something like a crystal dome above their heads. Later, theology turned this into a mystical symbol of divine power. But if you read it literally, it seems more like a sighting of a complex aircraft, observed by someone with no technological references. Josef Blumrich, an engineer who worked at NASA, originally tried to refute the idea that Ezekiel had seen a spaceship. After analyzing every detail, he wrote a technical study suggesting that the text had internal coherence consistent with a vertical lift vehicle. He even patented a design inspired by the wheels Ezekiel describes. Could Ezekiel have actually witnessed the landing of an extraterrestrial craft? The precision of his depiction of how it moved in all directions without turning around is tough to fit into mere allegory. In Ezekiel, chapter 1 verses 4 to 28, you see phrases like the likeness of, the appearance of, which show that he was comparing what he saw to familiar things, unable to identify it precisely. He describes a fire enfolding itself and something like the color of amber, which might indicate glowing metal radiating energy. If these visitors wore specialized suits, his mention of beings with a human face, plus lion, ox, and eagle faces, could reflect a distorted perception or part of the gear. Another possibility is that the faces represented different roles within the same group of crew members. Even the noise, like the roar of rushing waters, might describe the loud blast of engines, incomprehensible to a 6th century BC prophet. The text locates this vision on the banks of the Kabar River, indicating a specific time and place, but the official interpretation has traditionally turned it into a metaphysical message. Again, we wonder, could viewing this as a real physical encounter threaten the notion of a spiritual God and undercut the need for priests and ceremonies? This is strikingly similar to references to Vimanas in ancient Indian texts and flying clouds in Mesoamerican cultures, reinforcing the idea that beings from other planets may have visited different peoples at different times, adjusting their presentation to fit local conditions. But if that was the true identity of these gods, then the concept of divine revelation would lose its mystical aura. You can imagine the reaction of institutions that have banked on dogmas for centuries. Religious, academic, and governmental organizations would all have strong reasons to dismiss these literal interpretations as pure fantasy. If the revered divine figures throughout history were in fact extraterrestrial beings, humanity would have to rethink its past from top to bottom. Traditional theology, based on the idea of an invisible, all-powerful God, would face a monumental shock. We would need to rewrite interpretations of religious texts and let go of some rites based on outdated dogmas. On a larger scale, we would also question the political structures of nations founded on certain religious concepts. Instead of just stories, the sacred narratives would become real records of interactions with advanced civilizations, possibly responsible for boosting our genetic and cultural development. This would be the greatest secret ever kept under lock and key, because confirming it would undermine the legitimacy of thrones and altars, provoking chaos in societies that have been taught to see the divine in a completely different way. Some believe this confrontation is inevitable. With modern science moving closer to breakthroughs once considered magic, it makes sense to consider that our so-called gods may have simply possessed superior tools. This could be the next logical step in our collective maturity. Yet there is also the possibility that powerful forces, the same ones in charge of top-secret archives and the suppression of anomalies in academic publications, will keep resisting this revelation to maintain control over the narrative. At an individual level, this leads to deep reflections about our purpose in life, moral values, and spiritual meaning. It is impossible to deny that many people still find genuine comfort in religion, regardless of how or by whom it was built. Realizing that God could have been a set of extraterrestrial visitors can bring disillusionment or panic. But there are also thinkers who say that genuine spirituality does not have to be destroyed, only adapted. If the vastness of the cosmos hosts countless forms of intelligent life, why would the idea of a higher presence have to be invalidated? It might all fit within something far bigger than we ever imagined. To many, the extraterrestrial perspective does not wipe out the sacred. It means understanding that the sacred involves cosmic phenomena that extend beyond Earth's horizon. Religious institutions, though, would have to make room for a more universal outlook, possibly joining forces with science to move forward. The greatest obstacle is the resistance of long-standing power structures that thrive on the image of a distant, intangible God who always needs mediators between heaven and the faithful. Everything we have discussed points to the fundamental question: are the biblical gods and angels spiritual and metaphysical, or visitors from other planets who shaped our history? Reading ancient accounts literally suggests the latter, although traditional religiosity strongly favors metaphorical interpretations. Detailed references to equipment and vehicles, the way the plural is used when talking about creators, descriptions of hybrid beings, and other elements back up this theory. Stavrakopoulou showed that the progressive dematerialization of Yahweh was politically and religiously motivated. Kovacs noted how Gnostic writings were pushed aside, not because they challenged faith, but because they presented these entities in ways that were too concrete and scientific, detailing a transfer of knowledge that clashed with the plans of those who wanted to centralize authority. The extraterrestrial hypothesis ties together a lot of loose ends that official religious interpretations struggle to address without resorting to vague explanations. From a conspiracy standpoint, this centuries-long cover-up still shapes our world. Archaeological finds that might confirm alien visits are swiftly dismissed or classified, and conservative theologians refuse even to consider the possibility that angels or gods had actual physical contact with humans. As time went on, this stance sharpened the divide between what they call serious science and the marginal or esoteric investigations, ignoring the scientific principle that evidence should be examined no matter how much it challenges existing paradigms. None of this negates humankind's deep quest for meaning and transcendence. Some suggest that realizing we might have interstellar origins could expand and even enrich spirituality, tearing down the false walls separating science and religion. Kovacs believes ancient Gnostic ideas suggest our divine spark might be the legacy of off-world beings, without ruling out the possibility of a higher consciousness, but fitting us into a sprawling interstellar reality. Once people see that this hypothesis is not as far-fetched as official handbooks claim, every piece of the puzzle starts to fit. The sudden evolutionary leap to Homo sapiens, the massive stone structures of baffling precision, the disproportionate astronomical knowledge in early cultures, the constant references to fiery chariots, luminous clouds, and voices from the sky. It is logical that ancient minds would describe these manifestations using their limited vocabulary. The real mystery is why later generations, supposedly more advanced, have insisted on calling these stories symbolic or magical. After taking in all this, you might ask, who benefits from keeping humanity tied to a one-sided faith? The idea that all our reverence toward gods and angels might actually be directed at beings who traveled unimaginable distances to interfere in our existence is both fascinating and alarming. And in the end, what if that is the real story? All this information can be unsettling or thought-provoking, but there is a suggestion for anyone seeking to deepen their connection with higher realities, whether spiritual or extraterrestrial. Although many religious leaders have institutionalized faith, mystical traditions emphasize that we have direct access to elevated states of consciousness through contemplative practice. Kovacs and other researchers say ancient civilizations already had consciousness technologies that allowed direct communication with intelligences beyond normal physical limits. Meditation is one of those tools. By quieting the mental chatter, we create a gateway to dimensions that normally go unnoticed. Mystics and contactees around the globe describe similar experiences, including sensing the presence of more advanced beings, receiving telepathic insights, and gaining an expanded awareness. New findings in neuroscience show that regular meditation actually changes the brain's structure, making unusual states of perception possible. Viewers might wonder if this is just mass delusion or a doorway to the same experiences told in biblical times, now seen through a more informed lens. Anyone who follows the research and tries these methods has at least the chance to experience something that official religions kept under lock and key. If humanity was shaped by an alien touch, maybe each of us carries traits that go beyond purely earthly biology. All change starts with understanding your role as a co-creator, and the only way to connect with this divine intelligence is through meditation. We have developed a set of audio tools to help you reach that higher state of consciousness. To learn more and get immediate access, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write "It made sense to me" in the comments.